The sun poured into the hangar, illuminating the VIP helicopter. A critical warning light pulsed urgently. CEO Clara Vance, a whirlwind of tailored authority, stormed in with her board and immediate crew. Mark Ashton, a single father wearing faded protective gear, paused his mopping in the corner. Clara surveyed the chaos, her lips curving into a cruel, desperate smile. She pointed, "Fix this helicopter. I'll kiss you right now." Managers chuckled. The chief pilot glanced frantically at his watch. Mark looked up. He placed his mop neatly aside. "Give me 5 minutes." The hangar fell silent. The moment froze. Mark Ashton wasn't just a janitor. He was a creature of routine, a man who valued predictability over prosperity. His world now revolved around the constant need of his young son, Leo. Leo's condition demanded a schedule that never wavered. Guaranteed time off, predictable hours, and zero unexpected stress. Leo suffered from severe respiratory distress syndrome, requiring a meticulously sterile environment and an available parent for immediate intervention. Mark knew that a high-stress, high-travel technical role was incompatible with his son's fragile health. The role of hangar custodian fulfilled this perfectly. It was simple, low-visibility work, demanding physical effort, but sparing his mind the high-stakes calculus of his former life. The constant presence, the simple rhythm of cleaning, and the guaranteed 3 p.m. end time were his true treasures, more valuable than any corner office. 5 years ago, Mark had been a star. He was a certified aviation maintenance technician, specializing in the high-stress, low-tolerance world of rotor resonance and powertrain alignment. Mark wasn't just good, he was a master diagnostician who could read the physical language of a machine. He earned his reputation in volatile conditions, specializing in finding the impossible failures. The microfractures, the resonant frequency shifts, the bearing offsets invisible to standard sensors. His expertise lay in sensory data that computers couldn't process. The precise smell of overheating gear oil, the subtle feel of metal fatigue through a tool handle, and the sound of a component operating outside its harmonic sweet spot. He lived by the gospel of the wrench, the grease, and the subtle shift in sound. He walked away from that world after an accident that grounded him temporarily and, crucially, coincided with Leo's diagnosis. The accident wasn't his fault, but it involved a high-profile disciplinary review because Mark bypassed a standard 12-hour sensor recalibration procedure to make an emergency field repair, saving the helicopter but violating protocol. He realized then that his ability to see the truth often conflicted with the bureaucracy of safety. He traded his 6-figure salary, his certification, and the adrenaline of the flight line for a mop and a guaranteed paycheck. He needed to avoid the spotlight. He needed to avoid the weight of life or death decision-making that came with his expertise. He preferred to be the invisible man who simply maintained the physical space, a buffer between him and true, unpredictable risk. CEO Clara Vance, however, existed purely in the abstract. She was the face of the company, Helicopter Air's aggressive leader. Her environment was one of constant, deafening digital noise. Even now, her phone was vibrating incessantly with updates from her team, and she continually barked orders into a headset, prioritizing the perception of action over actual problem solving. She managed market perception, quarterly reports, and impossible deadlines. Her leadership was defined by urgency and public display. She used humiliation as a motivator, believing that public pressure forged resilience. Today, she faced immense pressure. The helicopter was scheduled to carry the delegation for the Global Transport Summit, a trip timed to secure a massive government contract worth over $500 million. A delay meant a political and financial catastrophe, potentially tanking the quarter. The maintenance team had already run the standard, computerized checklist 3 times. All sensors returned green. All diagnostics showed nominal performance. The team was using the most expensive, high-tech vibration analysis equipment available. Yet the chief pilot, Captain Miller, reported an intangible unease, a subtle, higher-frequency oscillation in the main rotor shaft during pre-flight spool-up, particularly as load increased. It was an anomaly they couldn't explain, and certainly couldn't fix by the rigid clock ticking down on the hangar wall. The system was stuck between a clean checklist and a pilot's gut feeling. Clara, ignoring the pilot's discomfort, insisted on finding a scapegoat and pushing for takeoff. The maintenance director stammered, pointing to the green lights. That's when Clara noticed Mark in the corner. He had been standing still, mop resting, his eyes closed for a moment, listening. Mark had developed an almost superhuman ability to filter the hangar's white noise, the fans, the ground traffic, the distant jet engines, to hear the specific low-volume acoustics of the mechanical components. His training demanded he listen to the oil sizzle, the belt friction, and the wind noise around the main gearbox. No one else in the room believed a janitor could hold the key. They saw only the stain on his work shirt, not the detailed memory bank of 1,000 flight hours etched into his hands. The tension was a tangible thing. Captain Miller, a 20-year veteran, tapped the microphone, his voice edged with panic. "The checklist is nominal, ma'am, but my gut says otherwise. We have a slight high-frequency wobble starting around 85% rotor RPM. It feels like a precursor to a harmonic resonance. If this is a bearing issue, it will become lethal at cruising speed. I cannot fly this machine with the VIPS on board." His refusal was professional but absolute. He was a professional, but he was alone against the bureaucracy. Clara's jaw tightened. She looked at the media, then at her watch. "Gut feeling doesn't get us a government contract, Captain. The press is setting up. We have 8 minutes until the agreed-upon takeoff window. I need a definitive technical reason to stop, not speculation." Her corporate survival instinct was overpowering her sense of safety. The lead maintenance manager, Robert, a man who owed his position to strict adherence to the manual, stepped forward, nervous but defensive. "We have verified all hydraulic pressure, actuator travel, and blade pitch, Director Vance. Our vibration monitoring system, VMS, is set to flag any deviation above 0.5 Gs. We are currently reading 0.08 Gs. If there is an issue, it is minor and non-structural. I recommend we proceed and monitor closely." Robert was echoing the safe procedural choice. His primary concern was avoiding responsibility for the delay by hiding behind the machine's output. Mark, who had approached the helicopter's undercarriage, spoke for the first time since his initial request, his voice a low, steady baritone, cutting through the anxiety. "You need to isolate the auxiliary power unit. Stop the ground supply and let the rotor system freewheel briefly. I need to hear the deceleration coast down." He was asking for an auditory diagnosis, not a digital one. Robert scoffed instantly, furious at the challenge to his technical authority. "Absolutely not. That violates 3 key pre-flight procedures, Ashton. We lose all logging data during a hard APU cut. The VMS is the only truth we trust. We stick to the manual. You're here to clean up the oil, not redesign the diagnostics, aren't you?" He added a crucial, condescending detail. "The sensors are designed to detect dynamic instability, Ashton. They don't miss a thing. You can't hear a bearing offset over the roar of a jet engine." Mark calmly countered, "That is exactly the failure point, Robert. The VMS is filtered to ignore static frequencies below 0.5 Gs to prevent false positives from wind shear and ground vibration. A bearing micro-shim offset at a non-critical component like the IGB will not spike above 0.5 Gs. It creates a subtle, low-amplitude, high-frequency vibration that is being filtered out by the VMS as environmental noise. But that frequency, once amplified by the main rotor's harmonic, will cause the titanium bolt to shear due to accelerated fatigue loading in less than an hour of flight." He was speaking a different language, the raw physics of failure, a language the digital managers no longer understood. The pressure of Clara's humiliating challenge now boiled into professional conflict. The memory of the kiss joke fueled the manager's desperate need to sideline Mark. One executive, the head of corporate communications, leaned into her microphone whispering, "He's just cleaning. Focus on the CEO's statement, people." They were all actively creating the noise that prevented the truth from being heard. Clara watched the interaction, her eyes darting between the clock, Robert's clean checklist, and Mark's terrifying certainty. She recognized the fundamental split, procedure versus perception. Robert was holding the rule book. Mark was holding the truth. A distinguished gray-haired representative from the Global Transport Summit delegation, Mr. Henderson, stepped out of the receiving lounge, concern etched on his face. He looked directly at Clara. "Director Vance, is there a problem with the aircraft's structural integrity? We require absolute assurance." The presence of the client representative doubled the stakes. The flight delay clock kept ticking. The risk exposure was mounting. They were 1 minute from missing the window entirely. Finally, Clara made a ruthless executive decision. "Robert, proceed with the manual checks. Mark, what you require is impossible without a full pre-flight cycle reset. You've had your moment." She turned, ready to authorize the disastrous fly and monitor decision. She chose the procedure over the risk of public failure. But Mark didn't retreat. He took a single, deliberate step forward, now standing directly in the light of the helicopter's landing gear. He saw the very faint, almost imperceptible sheen of polished metal dust clinging to the edge of the tail rotor drive. Shaft cover, a signature of friction, not lubrication. He realized the team was looking in the wrong place entirely. The problem wasn't the main rotor's blade pitch. It was a micro-instability being amplified through the drivetrain. He looked at Clara, not with defiance, but with an absolute, frightening certainty. "Director Vance, I am not asking for a procedure. I am giving you a diagnosis. If this helicopter takes off with a resonance failure, you will have a catastrophic structural separation within 40 minutes of flight. The problem is in the intermediate gearbox." His statement was the first concrete technical claim made all morning. He concluded, his voice unwavering. "I need 180 seconds. I can prove it without touching a single checklist sensor." The hangar held its breath, waiting for Clara to either sign the death warrant or trust the janitor. Mr. Henderson was watching, his arms crossed. The hangar was utterly silent now, focused entirely on the man in the silver-gray cleaning uniform. Clara Vance, facing an unacceptable choice, ruin the contract or risk manslaughter, chose Mark. She pointed a rigid finger at Robert. "Stand down, Robert. Mark, you have 3 minutes. If you are wrong, you will be permanently banned from this facility and face legal action for hindering flight operations." Mark nodded once. He didn't ask for permission again. He just acted. Mark didn't rush. He didn't fumble for tools. He walked calmly to the small panel covering the intermediate gearbox, IGB, located halfway along the tail boom. This gearbox reduces the drive shaft speed and changes the angle for the tail rotor. Its components are meticulously balanced. Mark retrieved a single clean microfiber cloth and a small, specialized mirror from his janitorial cart. These were not standard tools. They were the tools of a diagnostician who hunted for invisible truths. Hidden inside the cleaning cart, Mark always kept meticulously organized. He knelt down, removing the access panel quickly with an already loosened fastener. He bypassed the complex digital monitoring harness entirely. He used the mirror and a high-intensity pen light, not to look for a crack, but to examine the color and distribution of the lubrication film on the main input shaft. He then gently placed his ear against the cold metal of the IGB casing, shutting out the rest of the world. He was using the metal as an amplifier for the microsounds Robert had dismissed. He focused on the nearly imperceptible low-frequency hum that was being generated. He then did the most counterintuitive thing possible. He reached in, using the cloth, and gently rotated the IGB input shaft by hand, just a few degrees. This was the zero-load manual rotation test, a skill largely abandoned in the age of automated diagnostics. He wasn't trying to force anything. He was checking the free play. He then placed his fingertips on the joint housing, moving with the precision of a jeweler, feeling for the minute catch or resistance that signaled misalignment. "The bearing set is not fractured," Mark murmured, speaking only to Clara. "But the thrust-bearing microshim on the input pinion is offset by 0.004 of an inch." He specified the exact measurement, a tolerance smaller than a human hair, based purely on the physical resistance he felt and the audible tick he heard during the rotation. This microshift was impossible to detect with standard vibration sensors unless the machine was at full, destructive resonance. The VMS was blind to static misalignment. It only saw dynamic output. The shift was only audible and palpable during the zero load, Manual rotation test Mark was performing. The sensor only checked for presence of the bearing. Mark was checking for its precision. The offset meant that when the IGB began bearing the torque load of the tail rotor, the stress would not be distributed evenly across the bearing face. Instead, it would concentrate on a single point, creating a localized heat signature and, critically, inducing the harmonic wobble Captain Miller felt. It was a time bomb set by a tiny manufacturing defect missed by every machine check. Robert, watching Mark's hands, was trembling. Impossible. Show me the reading on the VMS display, Ashton. The reading is in my hands, Robert, Mark replied, not looking up. The machine is only as honest as the engineer who designed the filters. He needed to adjust it. He called out for a specific tool. A number 4 metric feeler gauge and a thin-walled 13mm socket. Now! A nervous junior technician scrambled to retrieve the items from the maintenance cart. Recognizing the tools were not standard flight line issue but personal, specialized items. Using the feeler gauge, Mark confirmed the clearance. He then used the thin-walled socket, carefully inserted into the cramped space. He executed a tiny, almost invisible adjustment, a quarter turn of the lock nut, relying purely on the torque memory in his hands, not a torque wrench. It was an act of surgical certainty. It took 160 seconds. He replaced the access panel with the same quiet certainty. It's done. Have the captain spool up to 90% RPM for 30 seconds. Check the tail boom vibration readout on the cockpit screen, not the external diagnostic. Captain Miller, his face a mix of disbelief and hope, jumped back into the cockpit. The hangar watched the pilot's screen. The rotors began their powerful, accelerating whine. They hit 85% RPM, then 90%. The pilot's eyes darted to the vibration readout. 0 oscillation. The machine was running smooth, quiet, and perfectly balanced. The subtle, high-frequency wobble was gone. Robert stood frozen, the color draining from his face. Captain Miller slammed his hand on the intercom. It's clean. She's running absolutely clean. Better than the last pre-flight. Relief flooded the hangar, quickly followed by the stunned realization of what had just happened. Mr. Henderson, the client representative, stepped forward, his stern demeanor replaced by professional awe. He spoke directly into the media microphones. Gentlemen, the flight is delayed, but safe. We have just witnessed a truly remarkable act of diagnostic precision. This individual, operating outside protocol, saved this aircraft from a catastrophic failure that all our technology missed. The ultimate confirmation came from the Chief Flight Safety Officer, Mr. Davies, a stern, independent regulator. He rushed over, staring at the closed panel. The IGB is the weakest link for resonance. We missed a physical check. Ashton found a 4,000 shim offset. This helicopter was an accident waiting to happen. Mr. Ashton saved the aircraft. His confirmation was the judicial verdict that ended the debate. Clara Vance stood motionless, her CEO authority dissolved by a single-hand adjustment. Her cruel public joke, designed to show her power, had instead exposed her complete dependence on the man she mocked. The power had irrevocably shifted. It was no longer about job titles or pay grades. It was about the proven ability to prevent death. The media crew, realizing the story had changed from on-time takeoff to near catastrophe averted by janitor, frantically adjusted their focus. Mark had won not a promotion, but the indisputable authority of proven competence. The atmosphere in the hangar was no longer one of chaotic fear, but of profound, respectful silence. The managers previously mocking Mark now avoided his gaze, their faces etched with professional shame. Robert, the maintenance manager, simply walked away, unable to face the man who had exposed his reliance on technology over craft. Clara Vance walked slowly toward Mark, stripping off her silk scarf, her corporate armor momentarily discarded. She stopped directly in front of him, looking him straight in the eyes. Her apology was public, clear, and delivered with the weight of her office. Mr. Ashton, my comment earlier, it was a deeply inappropriate, desperate act of corporate pressure. It was insulting to you, and it was a grotesque misuse of my authority. I apologize, profoundly and publicly. She spoke the words with genuine humility, realizing her constant push for speed nearly cost lives. She waited for a response, expecting either anger or the demand for the promised reward. Mark simply looked at the CEO who controlled his life and his livelihood. He ignored the apology's implied request for forgiveness. He ignored the promise of the kiss entirely. He looked at the helicopter, now humming gently, ready to fly. His eyes held the cold, objective truth of the machine. "I didn't do it for the joke, Director Vance. I did it because safety doesn't bargain." Mark's voice was soft, but the quote resonated like a bell, perfectly encapsulating his philosophy and instantly silencing the media chatter. That offset wouldn't have delayed the flight by an hour. It would have killed everyone on board. The clock you were worried about was ticking on their lives, not your contract. Clara leaned in. "You waited, Mark. Why? Why did you allow the chaos to escalate? If you knew the answer, why did you let us waste 30 minutes risking disaster?" She was asking about the cost of his silence. "I waited for you to eliminate the noise, Director Vance," Mark stated plainly. "The chaos, the shouting, the VMS reports, the checklist protocols, they were all noise. You and Robert were focused on reports, deadlines, and fear. I needed silence to act, because my method relies on sensory input that is easily masked. I needed your certainty, your ultimate sign of trust, to override the very systems that were blinding you. Until you accepted the possibility of failure outside your protocol, my voice was just more noise." He paused, delivering the final devastating blow. "Your pressure created the risk, Director Vance. My silence eliminated it." Clara recognized the ethical difference. Her pressure created risk. His quiet intervention eliminated it. She extended her hand, not for a kiss, but for a handshake, an acknowledgement of mutual respect. "I need your mind, Mark. I need your eyes on the maintenance team. I need you back on the flight line as our chief technical director." Mark shook her hand briefly, firmly. "I appreciate the offer, but I must decline the position, Director Vance." The entire executive team gasped. Robert, the maintenance manager who had mocked him, looked confused. "Why?" Clara asked, genuinely baffled. "I am offering you back your career, your title, and 3 times your previous salary. You are irreplaceable." Mark gestured around the vast, clean hangar. "I left that life to be certain for my son. The director role involves constant late-night calls, emergency travel, and political meetings. It demands abstraction. I need the schedule stability of the janitor, not the constant, unpredictable abstraction of a director. If I am in an office, I am reviewing reports. If I am here, I am reading the machine. I need to be here, where I can smell the oil and hear the friction. My value is the truth of the system, not the abstraction of the budget." The media crew, sensing the powerful refusal of promotion, started furiously typing. The invisible janitor was dictating the terms of the corporation. The massive VIP helicopter lifted off the ground smoothly. The perfect balance of its rotors, a testament to Mark's 4/1000ths of an inch adjustment. The flight was safe. The contract was secured. Clara Vance, having been saved and publicly humbled, used her authority to institutionalize Mark's power. She convened an urgent board meeting that evening. She faced intense resistance from the board's chief legal counsel, who argued against creating a non-executive authority. Clara's defense was fierce. "We nearly lost $500 million and the lives of 5 delegates because we trusted a digital filter over the truth of the machine. The man who saved us refuses rank, salary, and title. He only demands the right to enforce safety. I will not let protocol override physics again." The board, facing the reality of the near disaster, reluctantly conceded. She called Mark into her glass office one final time. "Mark, I accept your decision to remain the chief custodial technician. I understand your choice of stability over status, but I cannot leave the safety of this company and its passengers up to your quiet intervention alone. I need your truth codified." She presented him with a 2-page addendum to the corporate flight safety charter. "I am giving you the authority you truly require. I am offering you the absolute non-negotiable right to order an immediate, complete flight stop veto on any aircraft at any time, for any reason you deem necessary. This veto bypasses all executive and operational chain of command. If you, Mark Ashton, raise your hand, all engines must be shut down, all checklists suspended, and all personnel must immediately leave the area until your diagnosis is complete. Non-compliance by any manager or pilot, regardless of rank, results in immediate termination. This was a radical shift, a janitor holding the power to ground the entire company fleet. Mark read the document. It granted him the condition, the certainty, he needed to act without fear of consequence or political maneuvering. It was the institutionalization of silence and truth. He accepted the authority, but refused the implicit reward. The money stays with the other managers, Director Vance. I only require the authority to ensure no one dies because of a deadline. Clara signed the document with her golden pen. The flight stop veto was now law. No kiss was exchanged, but a far more potent covenant was established. The safety of the company was entrusted to the quietest man in the room. This was Mark Ashton's ultimate legacy, the power of stillness enshrined in corporate policy. Mark returned to the hangar floor. He picked up his microfiber cloth and his mop. He wasn't the janitor anymore. He was the hangar guardian, the silent, final word on safety. He had exchanged the risk of ambition for the certainty of authority. A week later, a new team, led by the head of cargo operations, Mr. Jennings, attempted to rush a huge freighter departure. As the frantic loading manager shouted at the pilot to ignore a minor hydraulic pressure fluctuation, trying to override the captain's concerns, Mark simply walked onto the tarmac and slowly raised his hand. The new protocol kicked in instantly. The loading manager froze mid-sentence, his voice dying in his throat. The pilot immediately engaged the engine stop sequence, the new rule overriding his instinct to debate. Mark checked a fluid level line that the manager had overlooked. The plane was grounded for 30 minutes. It saved the main actuator from catastrophic failure. Due to a seal leak, the digital gauge registered as mere fluctuation. He was still the single dad, still wiping the floor, but now his stillness commanded the power of life and death. One public mockery, one quiet counter-diagnosis, and one institutionalized rule had ensured that no schedule, no deadline, and no noise would ever compromise safety again. If you believe stories like this deserve to be told, leave a comment and subscribe to TT Healing Tales. We tell the stories that shouldn't be forgotten.